Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada की ग्रंथराज श्रीमद्-भागवतम की ओम अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मीलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरून् श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणरघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपादान् सहगणललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधो दीनबंधो जगत्पते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। मूकं करोति वाचालं पंगुं लंघायते गिरिं यत्कृपातमहं वन्दे श्रीगुरुं दीनतारिणं परमानन्दमाधवं श्रीचैतन्य ईश्वरम्। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिन् इति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्य देशतारिणे। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत् नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय देवकी नन्दनाय च नन्दगोपकुमाराय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः कृष्णाय वासुदेवाय हरये परमात्मने प्रणतक्लेशनाशाय गोविन्दाय नमो नमः. Reading from Granth Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 11, Text number 4, chapter entitled Jada Bharata instructs King Rahugana. Kindly repeat after me the verses. Is there behind you? Oh, okay. Prabhu, I think this is yours. Somebody got it by mistake. Yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena vā tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena vā tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena vā tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā. Someone else? Okay. Vaishnavis, Matajis. Yāvan mano rajasā pūruṣasya sattvena vā tamasā vānuruddham cetobhir ākūtibhir ātanoti niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā. niraṅkuśaṁ kuśalam cetaraṁ vā. Thank you. Word by word synonyms, translation, purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness and everyone's preeminent Shiksha Guru. Srila Prabhupada ki. Can you repeat after me the word by word meanings? Yāvat, as long as. Manaḥ, the mind. Rajasā, by the mode of passion. Pūruṣasya, of the living entity. Sattvena, by the mode of goodness. Vā, or. Tamasā, by the mode of darkness. Vā, or. Anuruddham, controlled. Cetobhir, by the knowledge acquiring senses. Ākūtibhir, by the senses of action. Ātanoti, expands. Niraṅkuśaṁ, independent, like an elephant, not controlled by a trident. Kuśalam, auspiciousness. Cha, also. Itaram, other than auspiciousness. Sinful activities. Va, or. Translation, can you repeat after me? As long as the mind of the living entity is contaminated by the three modes of material nature, goodness, passion, and ignorance, his mind is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. It simply expands its jurisdiction of pious and impious activities by using the senses. The result is that the living entity remains in the material world to enjoy and suffer pleasures and pains due to material activity. Kindly listen intently to these purports, which are the transcendental ecstasies of His divine grace. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is said that material pious and impious activities are both opposed to the principle of devotional service. Devotional service means mukti, freedom from material entanglement. But pious and impious activities result in entanglement within this material world. If the mind is captivated by the pious and impious activities mentioned in the Vedas, one remains eternally in darkness. One cannot attain the absolute platform. To change the consciousness from ignorance to passion or from passion to goodness does not really solve the problem. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita 14.26, Sagunan samatitya itan brahma bhoyaya kalpate. One must come to the transcendental platform, otherwise life's mission is never fulfilled. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Before commencing on the discussions of this verse, I seek the blessings of all the wonderful senior Vaishnavas who have inspired me so much to take up the process of Krishna consciousness, follow it, albeit imperfectly, but nevertheless still continue in the process. I seek your blessings that I may speak these truths of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam as per the purports of the Purvavarti Acharyas for your pleasure and my purification. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. I'll just seek 1 minute's time before. Yes. So this is a very important aspect that is mentioned in this translation as well as the purport. Srila Prabhupada starts his translation by mentioning that as long as the mind of the living entity is contaminated by the three modes of material nature, which is Sattvagun, Rajagun and Tamogun, the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna himself mentions in the 14th chapter, Sattvam Rajas Tama iti guna prakriti sambhava nibadhnanti mahabaho dehe deyanam avyayam. Dehi means the living entity. And because of the three modes of material nature, the living entity is entangled in material nature. And what happens because of that? Srila Prabhupada mentions that his mind, in fact it's his mind means the mind of the living entity, is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. They use the angusha, the word used here is trident. Another word used in scripture is goad, G-O-A-D, which goads the elephant. It's called angusha. So, the mind is exactly like an independent, uncontrolled elephant. How many of you had this experience that the mind is like an uncontrolled elephant? Okay, some of you have. Those of you who have not had that experience, please help us. It simply expands its jurisdiction. Ātanoti expands. It expands its jurisdiction of pious and impious activities by using the senses. So the mind acts through the senses, and by virtue of his contamination by the modes of material nature, it accordingly engages the senses into activities that result in pious and impious results. Srila Prabhupada used to famously remark that even if you have the desire to eat a chocolate, you will have to come back to the material world. So whether it is pious or impious, they are all binding. It could be whether it is gold chain, silver chain or iron chain, they could all bind. That is why the three modes are binding us. And it is mentioned that the result is that the living entity remains in the material world to enjoy and suffer pleasures and pains due to material activity. The Kathopanishad famous shloka about Samane Vriksha, on the tree there are two birds that are seated. One is the super soul and one is the living entity. And the living entity doesn't look at the super soul, the other bird. It constantly eats the fruits from that tree, which is sweet and bitter, or sweet and sour, which is essentially good and bad, or pious and impious. And in the 13th chapter as well, when we talk about urdhvamulam atashyakam, chandamsi yasya parnani, those leaves are essentially the Vedic scriptures. And what is mentioned in the Vedic scriptures? Parna means leaves. And clearly it is also mentioned by the Supreme Lord Arjuna as early as the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, that Traigunya Vishya Veda is Traigunya Bhavarjuna. Nirdvando, Nitya Sattvasto, Nir Yogakshema Atmavan. So therefore, all these thoughts of self-preservation, or for that matter, any form of material pious and impious activities are based on the simple principle that we are bound by the modes. And therefore Krishna is exhorting, is literally inciting Arjuna in the 14th chapter towards the end, that Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. It is not just, the interesting part is the last 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are meant to talk about Jnana Yoga. And in that Jnana Yoga, Krishna has conclusively mentioned Mam chayo avyabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate. It's very clear. So the conclusion right from the beginning to end of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam Gita is Bhakti Yoga. Bhakti yogena sevate. And then what happens? Sagunan samatityetan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. That's a shloka quoted here by Srila Prabhupada in the purport. So one goes beyond the modes and one gets situated in the Brahmabhuta platform. Brahma bhuyaya kalpate. Of course, from therein it is also mentioned that when you reach the Brahmabhuta platform, there, and when you look at all living entities in the same manner without any discrimination, then what happens is na shochati, na kankshati, without lamentation and hankering, samasarveshu bhuteshu, and such a person will get the topmost level of devotion. Mad bhaktir labate param. So that's broadly the direction that we have to take, that we shouldn't get caught in these pious and impious activities. It is like you have a flight to... I remember a joke when I was in school, in a magazine, in a local magazine, and I think it was in Tamil. The joke went something to the extent that there is a batch of 10 people who have come to somebody's house with a lot of luggage. So this child is being asked by the father, who has come at the gate, please check. So the child goes out and comes back and says, oh, this is the family we met in the train. We just told them that whenever you come to the city, you drop in. So they have dropped in with the whole luggage just because of the invitation, on the basis of a little bit of meeting inside the train. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, half an hour, one day. So therefore, when we are in the material world, if we try and seek to expand the pious and impious activities, expand our relationships in the material world, at a material platform, it will just keep us entangled in this material world. We have finite time. We have a flight. We are in the flight. We have a ticket. When the flight lands, we have to get out of at the destination. Okay, it's up to us, as they say, that we can make friendship with our neighbors, have a good relationship with the stewardess or the pilot. If you get a chance to go to the cockpit, all very good. But the key purpose, we should be clear that eventually when the flight lands, we have to get out. Of course, they will force us to get out. And that's pretty much what happens in the material nature. If we don't want to get out of this material body, material nature will force us. But then where we go to when we land is entirely up to the activities that we perform. There is a saying which we popularly learn in our typical art of mind control courses, that garbage in, garbage out. If you feed the mind the garbage, it will engage in garbage activities. So I keep here, one of the first things I heard from His Grace Mohan Prabhu in an IVF lecture long back in 2001 was that, it was in Hindi, he just said that jitna gud daloge utna meetha banega. So the more we want to sweeten the process of spirituality, the more we have to add Krishna conscious activities into it. There is no point in trying to simply artificial repression, Krishna says. So this 11th chapter of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam in this 5th canto, it describes that the mind is the cause of samsara. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur confirms this, that what is being indicated is that the mind is the cause of samsara, that it has many transformations based on this various permutation combination because of the contact with the modes of nature, and that by engaging in bhakti one can attain liberation. So this is essentially the part that is mentioned. So clearly Prabhupada, in line with the acharyas, has mentioned in the purport that devotional service means mukti. Muktirhi tanvatarupam swarupena vyavasthiti. That swarupa is to perform eternal service to the Supreme Lord. Jivera Sharupahai Krishner Nityadas. In that position one has to serve. Krishner Tatastha Shakti Bhedabhed Prakash. We must understand that although we are serving the Lord, we are qualitatively one with the Lord. And we should still not misunderstand that we are God, because we are qualitatively one with God. Therefore we keep serving the Supreme Lord at any possible instance in our journey of spirituality. Like Srila Prabhupada said, what will a typewriter do? You send it to hell, it will still go cut. Similarly, for a jiva, the purpose is just service. And Prabhupada mentions in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam that by contact with the modes of material nature, the living entity's service attitude gets converted into the desire for sense gratification. And that desire for sense gratification results in pious and impious activities, punya, papa, etc. King Rahugana is being told by Jada Bharata, and the conversation is kind of presented by the acharyas also similarly. So basically, because the jiva, the conditioned jiva, is covered by the material body, so therefore Jada Bharata is trying to answer him that therefore the soul feels fatigue or tiredness. Like Rahugana is taunting Jada Bharata that, oh, you must be feeling very tired. So he is trying to answer that by saying the living entity by itself will not get fatigued, but because it is covered by the senses or the body, the body is material. So this feeling of fatigue which comes in is material. And Rahugana very intelligently uses philosophy to justify his point. So just like a pot is in contact with the fire, it heats the milk which cooks the rice, example. So acharyas are saying in this example, the pot is also material, and the material fire is connecting. But the connection between the body and the soul is not like that. The soul is spiritual. The body is material. So this analogy is itself wrong. And on top of that, Jada Bharata says, and this whole example, your inference fails, because you cannot say that you, the conditioned jiva, Rahugana, you are the same as me, the liberated jiva, Jada Bharata. He is saying, the acharyas are indicating this conversation. So you cannot have, as I said, don't compare apples with oranges. The context is itself wrong. And so, in the next verse, it comes in also the second verse of the chapter, that spiritual discussions are pure, shuddha, and they are without passion, sadhu. That's why we also say svadhu, svadhu, pade, pade. These discussions are very, very relishable, but it is also sadhuhu. Sadhuhu means without passion, any mode of passion. They are different from discussions on Swargaloka. It is not like that. So spiritual discussions, prayana, the word used is prayana. By and large, they don't arise in these kind of statements about Swargaloka. So therefore, Jada Bharata is saying, however, by performing activities in the Vedas, which is what is connected to today's verse also, by performing activities of the Vedas without desire for results and offering them to the Supreme Lord, by knowledge and detachment, one can reach the supreme spiritual platform. So it is not wrong per se to perform Vedic sacrifices because Vedas emanate from the breathing of the Lord. And dharmam to sakshat bhagavat pranitam. Dharma is provided by the Supreme Lord and the Vedas help us maintain that dharma. So Vedas per se are not wrong. But when people misuse the Vedas, it is yathate moha kalilam, when one is lost in the dense forest of delusion, then there is a problem. So when we have to study the Vedas also, or Vedic scriptures, we should do so in the association of devotees. Like Srila Prabhupada has so mercifully given us Bhakti Vedanta purports. So we can understand Vedic literature through that lens. In fact, by the mercy of the Acharyas, we can look at the material world through the lens of scriptures. Shastra Chakshusha. Jai Shri Radha Parasarati Lalita Vishaka Ki Jai. So we can look at the material world through Shastra Chakshusha. And what is mentioned here is when we perform Vedic sacrifices or Vedic activities, one should do so for the pleasure of the Lord and offer them to Him. Thus he can reach the spiritual platform. Like we know even in many Vedic sacrifices, towards the end they say Kayena Vacha Manasendriyava Udyatmanama Prakrite Swabhavat. Prakrite Swabhavat means problems arising because of the modes of material nature. And therefore, then what do you do? Karomi yadyat sakalam parasmai Sriman Narayana iti samarpayami. Or for that matter, Akashat patitam toyam yada gacchati sagaram sarvadeva namaskaram keshavam pratigacchati. The demigods, Jai Shri Shri Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki Jai, Shri Shri Gauranitai ki Jai. So like, even offerings to the demigods which come under Upasana Kanda or elements of Karma Kanda, the results all have to be offered to the Supreme Lord because eventually they go to the Supreme Lord. The worship always goes to the Supreme Lord. The worshipper may go to the demigod or any other purpose that we are aspiring for. So this we should be very clear that the purpose of all these even Vedic activities should be eventually for the purpose of the Supreme Lord. But then it is also mentioned by the Acharyas that the happiness that karmis derive by engagement of the senses as per the modes of material nature is very meager. And it is related to the material objects which are by themselves perishable. Thus the Atma does not have a relationship with the material happiness. We may momentarily feel that we are happy, but the Atma per se has no connection to this material happiness. So this happiness is false for the Atma. It is like the horns of a rabbit, Acharyas say, horns of a rabbit. A rabbit doesn't have horns. Quite similarly, desiring material happiness for the Atma is like the horns of a rabbit. Srila Burijan Prabhu mentions in one of his comments that unless we are convinced about this equation, that sense gratification equals misery, we will never be able to advance in spiritual life. We should be convinced that sense gratification equals misery. And the more we are trying to follow the process of Krishna consciousness, eventually the more we will understand. Like one of the symptoms of devotional service is Klesha Agni. We understand that the material world is full of distress. So in today's verse, the question is that why is it that generally, even though enlightened by devotees, devotees are there to help, Krishna sends devotees to help conditioned jivas improve themselves, not engage in activities that are pious or impious or otherwise. In sakama karma or vikarma, devotees are there to help them engage in akarma. Still, people engage in material happiness. It is like Arjuna asking Krishna, Ata kena prayuktoyam papam charati purusha anishchannapi varshne baladivanyojita. How is it that a living entity is performing sinful activities against his own will sometimes? We don't want to do impious activities, but we still do. And therefore, Krishna replies, Kamesha krodesha rajoguna samudbhavaha mahasano mahapapma vidyana miha vairinam. It is lust only arising out of the mode of passion, which is the all-devouring enemy of the world, mahashno. It eats everything. And it doesn't stop here. He says mahapapma, it is most sinful. And therefore, like the Avanti Brahmana mentions in the 11th canto, Nayam jano me sukha dukkha heto na devadatma graha karma kalaha manah param karanama mananti samsara chakram parihartayetad. We may think that it is people who are our friends or enemies that will cause us happiness and distress. We may think it is because of the planetary constellation. You may think it is because of karma. We may think it is because of the unseen providential factor of time. But the Avanti Brahmana says, no, it's none of this. He says, mana param karanam amananti. It is a mind that causes us to rotate in the cycle of material world. Samsara chakram pariharti ettan. There also we keep quoting, Srila Prabhupada quotes this shloka, mana eva manushyanam karanam bandha mokshayo. The mind itself is that which causes us entanglement and liberation. And Krishna himself says in the Bhagavad Gita, mana shashtani indriyani prakritistani karshati. We try to enjoy the resources of material nature with the 6 senses, including the mind, which is called the master sense. So in whichever way you look at it, the mind is a big problem. How many of you think that controlling the mind or managing the mind is a significant aspect of a spiritual life? So many of you think so. So Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita himself, Avritam jnaname tena jnanino nityavairinam kamarupena kaunteya dushpurenana lenacha nityavairinam. He says eternal enemy. Eternal enemy means it is not just a little threat, it is a heavy threat. So if there is an eternal enemy staying right with you, is it your duty to vanquish the enemy or otherwise? If you don't vanquish the enemy will vanquish you. So he is talking about kama rupena kauntya, the lust. And Krishna mentions in Bhagavad Gita that lust resides primarily in the mind, intelligence and the senses. So it eternally clouds our consciousness. Lust eternally clouds our consciousness, and because of this, what happens is that the soul, who is the immediate neighbor of the soul? Okay, we talk about false ego. Who is the immediate neighbor of the soul as per the hierarchy? Indriyani parani ahur indriyabhya paromana manasattu paro buddhe yo buddhe paratastu saha. So the intelligence is the immediate neighbor of the soul. But just imagine, the intelligence, therefore the job of the intelligence is to guard the soul. He has to guard the spirit soul from anything wrong or untoward from happening. Just imagine if you have a security guard and that security guard has taken sides of the enemy and he has taken a bribe. So then can you trust that guard? Can you trust that guard? No, you can't. So quite similarly, the lustful intelligence is supposed to protect the soul, but instead it results in acquiring the false ego, and which continues material existence. So the soul continues to believe that pious and impious activities, pleasure and pleasure and distress, they are all felt by me. But in reality, it is because of this lustful intelligence. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that by studying scriptures, one's intelligence is sharpened to discriminate between what is right and what is wrong. His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj mentions that by studying scriptures, you get 20/20 vision, which means perfect vision. Many of us have specs here, but Guru Maharaj says that 20/20 vision we get by studying scriptures, Shastra Chakshusha. So then, because lust resides in the mind also, and the intelligence also, and the senses also, which is the easiest to trace? Is it the mind, is it the intelligence, or the senses? Which is the easiest to trace, to find out? Which is the easiest? It is the senses because they are gross. The others are subtle. An enemy is hiding somewhere, a terrorist is hiding somewhere, we will not be able to know. But it is easiest to know when they are somewhat visible, and then you can find them out. But at least in the matter of the senses, they are gross. So if lust resides in the gross senses, it is easier to identify. An angry man can be easily identified, but a lustful man cannot be very easily identified. And because if lust resides in the mind and the intelligence, it's even tougher. But because the senses are gross, we can therefore try to engage the senses in Krishna's service. Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanam Bhakti Ruchyate. That will save us from engaging in more and more pious and impious activities. How is Shiro Rishikesha Pada? before that, the first thing I ended up saying Shira, I wanted to say, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindyo. That's where it starts. The first part, you want to engage your senses. All the senses are being talked about. Vacham Sevaikunda Gunan Varnane, Karo Haro Mandira Marjana Adishu, and then he talks about Sudim Chakarachita Satkatode, Mukunda Lingale Darshanadrisho. So all these senses have to be engaged by Ambarish Maharaj saying. But right in the beginning he says, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindyo. Now it seems to be a slight contradiction that on the one hand we say senses are most gross, but you are instead saying that the mind should be engaged in the Supreme Lord service. So how do we handle that? So how do we handle that? We have to understand that based on the object, the reflection will change. If you're looking at a mirror and you move your right hand, the mirror will also, in the mirror also the image, the right hand will be moving. It may look different, but quite similarly, the first creation of any activity happens in the mind. Then the senses are engaged accordingly. So we should try both at an external level. I once remember my spiritual master instructing me, just try and control the mind and senses. So you cannot really separate the two. Fully saying that no, you only have to control the mind or you have to only control the senses. So then the question comes that the senses are already agitated. We should not aggravate them. His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami mentions that one should, if one is very serious about advancing in spiritual life, one should guard oneself against associating with those situations which are detrimental to one's progress in spiritual life. One should consciously avoid those situations. Like Srila Prabhupada told the devotees when they took him to a nightclub for kirtan, Srila Prabhupada said, this is no place for a brahmachari. We have to be very, very careful in terms of whether it's brahmachari in the brahmachari ashram or brahmachari in the grahastha ashram or vanaprastha ashram. All of us have to perform these principles of avoiding those activities, pratikulasya varjanam, which binds the senses further, which aggravates the senses further. They are already agitated. So we should consciously avoid that. And His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami mentions in one of his lectures that by participating in kirtan, one can control the mind. Kirtan, Sankirtan, one can control the mind. I remember His Grace Vayasiki Prabhu once mentioning when I asked him, how can one focus one's mind while chanting the Hare Krishna Mahamantra during japa? He said, before you chant japa, you participate in kirtan. So that stabilizes the mind further. So when we are, that is why we have the morning program where before japa we have Mangalarati, Kirtan, and then Narasimha-arati, Tulsi-arati, etc. So it is important for us to enthusiastically participate in those Kirtans. And apart from that, I know many devotees, they go around with Kirtan playing on their mobile or their hearing device, so that constantly playing. So Kirtan is a great way to stabilize the mind. And if at all the mind gets distracted or deviated, Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, yato aito nischalati manaschanchalam astiram. Naturally possible, it may keep going here and there. So, but wherever it goes, one has to consciously draw it back. Draw it back to the holy names of Krishna. Srila Gurujan Prabhu mentions that in his 9 keys to good japa, the first japa he says that keep chanting Hare Krishna. Whatever be the situation, you should chant Hare Krishna. If you feel lusty, chant Hare Krishna. Feel angry, chant Hare Krishna. Feel lazy, chant Hare Krishna. And that is why it is said, always remember Krishna, never forget Krishna. Smatave satatam Vishnu vismartavyo na jatuchit. Sarve vidhi nishedyo syatyor eva kinkara. All other rules and regulations are secondary to this. But then how does it happen? Vishnu Smaranam comes by attentive Shravanam and Kirtanam. Vishnu Smaranam will come by attentive Shravanam and Kirtanam. So therefore, Savai Mana Krishna Padara Vindyo and the whole sequence of everything, Shrutim Chakarachita Satkatodeye, taking part in the Bhagavatam class, participating, whether it is speaking or listening. Tatpaja Sarora Saurabe, using your nose to smell. Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, that's the next line. Rasanam tadarpanam, tadarpane. So that offering that tulasi to the lotus feet and tasting that, smelling the flowers offered to the lotus feet. Tat pada saroja saurabhe, lotus or flowers that are offered to the feet of the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. Similarly, by engaging all the senses and at the same time engaging the mind. And Krishna himself says the two most important verses whom Acharyas say in the Bhagavad Gita, they are the crest jewels on the top of the Jnana Yoga chapters, 18th chapter. Which are those two shlokas? Manmana bhavamat bhakto and sarvadharman parityaja. So manmana, Krishna starts with that, engaging the mind in his lotus feet. So how does one do that? In the Vishnu Purana there, and Padma Purana also is a brief mention of this. Probably Vishnu Purana, this shloka, yeah, Vishnu Purana. It's a beautiful prayer. I've quoted this in the Bhagavatam class itself several times. Matsamo nasti papatma na aparadhi cha kasyana pariharopi lajjesmin kimbruvi purushottama. There is nobody more sinful than me. Matsamo nasti papatma na aparadhi na kasyana. When you go before the deities, we should, at least those of us who feel we are sinful, should hang our heads in shame before the deities. We are so sinful, we can't stand before the deities. Pariharapi lajjosmin kimbruvi purushottama. What can I say? I'm so sinful. He has some solution. So then what does he say? The devotee prays to the Lord. Yuvatinam yatha yunim yunam cha yuvatav yata manobhiramate tadvan manomeramatām toyi. Like a young man is attracted to a young woman and vice versa. May my mind be drawn to your lotus feet, O Supreme Lord. Or like Kunti Maharani prays, like Gangai Vogam Udanmati. Tvaime ananya vishaya. That's the way to engage the mind. His Holiness Bhakti Vishrambha Madhav Maharaj, I heard his lecture once in Vrindavan. He clearly mentioned that if the mind is disturbing us and getting us more entangled, then you must chant louder than the mind. Must chant louder than the mind. That is the way to do it. Chant the Hare Krishna mantra louder than the mind. And it's important, therefore, just because we are chanting louder, we should not be in a hurry to complete our rounds. His Holiness Gopal Krishna Goswami Maharaj mentions in a very interesting way of chanting. Like one father told his son that you should chant Hare Krishna 16 rounds. He said, yes, father. Next morning he asked him, have you completed your rounds? Yeah, of course I completed your rounds. It was like 4:45. So you got up so early? So no, I got up like normal. How did you complete your rounds? Well, I chanted first Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and then I said ditto, 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 ditto. So we should not be chanting ditto rounds, Maharaj says. We should be, he clearly says that it is, some devotees ask me whether I should increase my number of rounds, shall I increase my number of rounds? So Maharaj says clearly, it's very, very important to, even if you are chanting, it is okay to chant 16 rounds or at least 16 rounds, what Prabhupada said. It is okay to chant 16 rounds, but you must chant them attentively. Attentive chanting is most critical because inattentive chanting is the cause of all problems. Attentive chanting is a solution to all problems. And Srila Prabhupada mentions that the result of good chanting is more chanting. So therefore, if at all we want to control the mind, which binds us into pious and impious activities, which keeps us getting more and more entangled in the activities of the material world, just like an elephant which is uncontrollable. In English there is a saying, there is an elephant in the room. If there is an elephant in the room, you cannot ignore it, no? It's there. It's an elephant in the room, you cannot ignore it. By the same token, the time management principles talk about an elephant sandwich. What is an elephant sandwich? If you have to eat an elephant, we shouldn't. But how can you eat an elephant? You can eat an elephant sandwich by every day gradually eating a little bit. Of course, let us not apply principles of Shuchi Muchi into this. It is just an understanding of time management. So we should gradually keep trying to increase our attention levels to the Hare Krishna Mahamantra. His Grace Gurujan Prabhu as well as His Holiness Sachinandan Maharaj mention about focusing on at least one syllable, Hare or Hare Krishna, focusing on that and then chanting the rest of the mantra. Because even if we hear one syllable, it is most auspicious. The word used here, very interestingly, the word used here is kuśalam cha itaram, auspiciousness and inauspiciousness. But we should know what is kuśalam. Bhuvana Mangala Tumi, it is mentioned, Krishna's Bhuvana Mangala Tumi. And it is also mentioned that one of the qualities of devotion service is Shubhada. It bestows auspiciousness. How does this Shubhada come? How does this auspiciousness come? Because when the mind is engaged in auspicious activities, and for that, His Grace Gurujan Prabhu mentions in his book on Japa, he mentions that specifically he uses the word that even if you hear one mantra, forget all the inattentive mantras you have heard, forget all the inattentive mantras you may chant in the future. All you can hear is this one mantra. Just focus on that. Focus on that one mantra. Focus on, if not the whole mantra, on one syllable. And focus on that repeatedly, repeatedly, repeatedly. And when we do that, the mind slows down. This is what Acharyas say. We have to try it. The more we try it, the more results will come. Because I heard from a spiritual master once, he said that one should work like everything depends on our effort. And one should pray like everything depends on Sri Krishna. So it is a mercy descending process. But at the same time, there is endeavor and there is mercy. When we do this combination, it becomes logical for the mind to be controlled, or the mind to be engaged appropriately. And when the mind is engaged appropriately, it will not connect the senses to engage in pious and impious activities. And Prabhupada mentions in the purport, very important point, quoting Chaitanya Charitamrita, that both pious and impious activities are opposed to devotional service. So when we are in Krishna consciousness, we should introspect. Srila Prabhupada mentioned that one of the secrets of my success is because I was introspective. So when we introspect and the association of devotees, we must see in our life, are we just acting as pious brahmanas, or are we trying to come to the Vaishnava platform? One of my godbrothers used to be once a full-time resident of this temple, and later on, by choice and by superior direction, he entered Grihastha Ashram. But after entering Grihastha Ashram, he used to not come so frequently. So, his Guru Maharaj asked him that you become a pious Brahmin. So it's not, our job is not to become pious Brahmins. We occasionally take to Krishna when we need it and when we don't. If it has to be ahaitukya apratihata, consistently and without interruption and without any motive, then pious and impious activities don't bind us. The question we have to ask us in the association of devotees is that, are we engaging in activities that are actually pious activities, but they're masquerading as devotional service? They may look like devotional service, but our consciousness may be such that we are fruitive about this. So we should consciously try to identify those activities which are seemingly pious or impious in our consciousness. But at the same time, this is also true that yena tena prakarana mana Krishna niveshet, and akama sarva kama va moksha kama udharati. Whether we have all desires, no desires, desire for liberation, still it is far better to perform devotional service for the Lord and approach Him with all those desires. It is like, my Lord, I am full of faults, please accept me. There is no other option. Srila Prabhupada mentioned as long back as 1967 in a morning walk conversation. He said, my dear Lord, you pray to the Lord, he said. Told one of his lady disciples, Vaishnavi disciples. He told her that, pray to the Lord that, my dear Krishna, I am weak, I am frail, I am unqualified, I keep trying, but I fail. So therefore, please accept me, engage me in your service, please save me from your external energy. This way, when we engage in conscious prayer, and apart from that, we engage in conscious care. So a little bit of prayer, little bit of care, both are required. Conscious prayer to the Supreme Lord and conscious care of our devotional life. Associating only with those situations which don't make us indulge in binding activities, but they engage us in liberating activities. Liberating activities will come by associating with Mahat Pada Rajobhishegam. By serving the Vaishnavas, it becomes easy. Because even we talked so much about chanting Hare Krishna and attentively to control the mind and to save us from pious and impious activities. But please, we must remember that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu mentions, the first line he mentions is Sadhu Sangha Namakirta Bhagavat Shravan Mathravas Srimurtira Shraddhaya Shevan. The first line he says is Sadhu Sangha. Even to chant attentively, we need the mercy, Mahat Kripa we need. Which is why we chant the Vanchakalpa prayers and we chant the 10 offenses to the holy name to escape them. One of the instructions I received from His Grace Jitendra Prabhu when I went to him once was, when I asked him how do I improve my chanting, he told me that you should chant the 10 offenses attentively every day. So I make it a point that even if I chant Gayatri a little before, I complete it before the 10 offenses start and I chant those 10 offenses loudly. Not that we are very, very careful, but at least by chanting this loudly and it will make us that much more careful. As they say in Hindi, Savdhani hati durghatna ghati. So we don't want to get into that situation and we must try to avoid these offenses, seek the mercy of all Vaishnavas and the Supreme Lord to chant His names attentively so that we engage in pure Krishna conscious activities. So that is the key take home from this purport. I now seek words of wisdom from senior Vaishnavas, His Grace Sridham Prabhu, His Grace Jitendra Prabhu, His Grace Mohan Prabhu, Agri Prabhu. Yes, Prabhu.
Rishi, Prabhupada ji कह रहे हैं, devotional service means mukti, freedom from material entanglement. और लास्ट में लिखते हैं, one must come to the another platform, otherwise life's mission is never fulfilled. तो मेरा प्रश्न ये है कि जो व्यक्ति खुद ही मुक्त नहीं है, ऐसे व्यक्ति का उदाहरण जब दिया जाएगा तो मुझे नहीं लगता है कि हम धोखे उल्टा उसकी बात को सोच करके उसकी तरह काम करना शुरू कर देंगे। तो जब हम कोट करते हैं किसी आदमी को, प्रभुपाद को कोट कर सकते हैं, महाराज को कोट कर सकते हैं, लेकिन किसी ऐसे व्यक्ति को कोट करना जिसका अपना जीवन जिस पीसेस है उठी नहीं,
the principle of Krishna consciousness is to speak about advanced Vaishnavas who can help us advance in Krishna consciousness. But the other mention that is made in Krishna consciousness is that, at least the instruction from my spiritual master to me is that one should respect all senior Vaishnavas and especially in case of senior God brothers and spiritual masters, God brothers, they should all be respected sincerely. So that is the direction that I had. But if there are any specific standards laid out in a Bhagavatam class that we should only be quoting Prabhupada and contemporary spiritual masters, if there is such a rule, then we should all follow it. If there is such a rule, we should follow it. That is the principle. Okay. So my point on this is again that 10 offenses have to be chanted. Everybody has to chant and everybody should try to avoid them. And as far as I am concerned, I understand that the first offense is most dangerous for me. So whichever way I look at it, I don't want to offend any Vaishnava. I understand the principle, Prabhuji, what you are saying, and I will keep that in mind. Okay.
जो कर्म योग के ऊपर बताएं, उसमें भी भक्ति जो है इस श्लोक में ऐसा है, yāvan manaḥ rajasā pūruṣasya।
हाँ।
लास्ट में niraṅkuśaṁ। तो इसका मतलब है कि जब रजगुण आता है तो व्यक्ति इंडिपेंडेंट हो जाता है।
हाँ,
तृष्णा संग समर्पण,
Krishna Sangha Samudvam. Made in contact of the senses.
तो इसलिए उसको कभी हम satisfy नहीं कर सकते। और इसलिए ये कर्मयोग में ही भगवान बताते हैं जुक्ता कर्म फल संध्यावत दृष्टि न कर्म फल संयोग भावस्तु प्रवर्तते। इसमें कर्म फल को भोग नहीं करेगा। ये जो बात उठ गई है कर्म इनका होगा जब जुड़ता रहेगा, भक्ति में जुड़ता रहेगा। इसलिए कर्म योग में लास्ट में 6 चैप्टर में उसमें कहते हैं अंतरात्मा।
हाँ, मद्गतेन अंतरात्मना श्रद्धावान भजते हम। यस यस, थैंक यू।
सेकेंड पॉइंट है आपसे मंगल करेंगे, भुवन मंगल, तो श्रवण मंगल भी है।
हाँ। Yes, in connection with this, I want to say one point before Prabhuji speaks. Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan mentions that when you deal with an enemy, you use chaturupaya, sama, dana, beda, danda. But when it comes to the lust and the lustful mind, there is no other method, there is only danda. So, like Bhaktisiddhanta Maharaj says that you should beat it with the broom and beat it with the slippers in the morning and evening. For the mind, there is lustful mind, there is no other escape. It has to be danda. Yes, please.
सबसे पहली बात तो ये है कि हम लोग सब जो शिक्षाशास्त्र में पाठ करते हैं, दर्शनानुसार बोलते हैं, तो ये कोई किसी एक व्यक्ति का बनाया नियम नहीं है, मंदिर के अधिकारियों के द्वारा बनाया गया नियम है। और हम लोग जो उसमें पाठ करते हैं तो नादा भी सुननी चाहिए। तो ये जो है हम अगर पाठ करते हैं तो कुछ भावना आएगी, लेकिन जो लोग नहीं पाठ करते हैं, चले जाते हैं या गायत्री जब करते हैं, नादा भी सुननी चाहिए, वो नहीं बनना चाहते हैं। हम तो कर रहे हैं। और दशरथ जो नहीं बचना चाहते हैं वो दशरथ नहीं बोलते, हम तो दशरथ सुनना चाहते हैं, इसलिए हम दशरथ बोल रहे हैं। त्रिनादा विष्णु से हम बनना चाहते हैं, इसलिए हम त्रिनादा विष्णु सिंह गा रहे हैं। तो हमारे जो है जो नियम बनाए गए हैं हमारे लाभ के लिए बनाए गए हैं। इसमें कोई मतलब वो नहीं है कि भाई मैं जो है छोटा हूँ या बड़ा हूँ। कोई व्यक्ति अगर भोपाल के और उनके नियुक्त जो अधिकारी हैं उनके द्वारा दिए गए नियमों का पालन करे तो उसकी शुद्धिकरण होगा। तो अगर इससे अगर मेरा शुद्धिकरण हो रहा है तो मेरा कोई गुण नहीं है, क्योंकि नियम बनाए गए हैं जो मंदिर के अधिकारियों के द्वारा तो है, तो इसी से शुद्धिकरण हो रहा है। और इसमें हमारा विश्वास है, इसमें कोई वो चीज़ नहीं है कि मैं कोई अधिकारी हूँ कि मैं जो है आपको शिक्षा दूँ। लेकिन मैं अगर कुछ शिक्षा दे रहा हूँ तो वो बात उनके द्वारा जो नियुक्त किए गए अधिकारियों के नियम के अनुसार शिक्षा दे सकता हूँ। तो मुझे अधिकार है बताने का कि ये दशरथ बोली, इससे आप जो है आप दशरथ से बच सकते हैं और बचने की संभावना भी है कि आप लोग दशरथ बोलेंगे। इसमें कोई ऐसी बात नहीं है कि मैं शिक्षा दे रहा हूँ, मेरी शिक्षा नहीं। दूसरी बात तो है कि चंदन यात्रा का जो अध्ययन है तो ये जो है आज बहुत पवित्र।
अच्छा, थैंक यू।
थोड़ा सा हम चर्चा करेंगे कि गोपाल जी ने चंदन मांगा था माँ देवेंद्रपुरी से, तो वो गोपाल जी है कहाँ पर प्रकट हुए थे? जो झाड़ी में दबे हुए थे। उन्होंने कहा कि मेरी स्थापना बजराम ने की थी, तो बजराम ने स्थापना की थी मेरी, और मैं यहाँ गोवर्धन क्षेत्र का ही स्वामी हूँ, और जो लोग माँ की भी नहीं खाते हैं तो उनको मैं पहुँचाता हूँ। तो वे गोपाल जी माँ देवेंद्रपुरी के वे गोवर्धन में हैं। और जो भ्रांति फैली हुई है कि नाथ द्वारा में श्रीनाथ जी के रूप में पूजित हुए हैं, तो ये एक जो है भ्रांति है, क्योंकि नाथ द्वारा में जो श्रीनाथ जी हैं तो उनके बारे में बताया गया है गर्ग संहिता में कि कलयुग के 4500 साल लगेंगे तो गोवर्धन के श्रृंगार मंडल की एक गुफा में वो प्रकट हो गए। तो वो प्रकट हुए गुफा के अंदर, तो उनको जो है गर्मी नहीं लगी, तो गुफा के अंदर प्रकट हुए। और ये भी उसमें बताया गया कि विष्णु स्वामी से बताया कि जो आचार्य वल्लभाचार्य तो वो उनकी स्थापना करेंगे और उनकी संप्रदाय।
ये सब गर्ग संहिता में है, इट्स ऑल देयर इन गर्ग संहिता।
कलयुग 4500 साल देखने में हो, लेकिन वो भ्रांति जो है अगर गोपाल जी ने स्वयं कब पैदा करके तो हम लोग भी भ्रांत हैं, हम लोग भी भ्रांत हैं। तो जो गोपाल जी जो माध्यमेंद्रपुरी के हैं वो बद्रीनाथ जो नाथ द्वारा में श्रीनाथ जी हैं तो वो जो है स्वतः प्रकट परिचय देते हैं, जो कि वल्लभाचार्य
स्वयंभू, हाँ,
स्वयं प्रकट है वो, तो अलग है। और इन्होंने मतलब चंदन मांगा था क्योंकि ये झाड़ी में पड़े रहे और इनको जो है कई सौ सालों से जो है बरसात का, गर्मी का कष्ट सहना पड़ा। तो ये जो है माधवेंद्रपुरी के जो गोपाल जी हैं, तो जब चैतन्य महाप्रभु इनके दर्शन करना चाहते थे तो माधवेंद्रपुरी ने गोवर्धन पर्वत के मंदिर बनवाया था। तो चैतन्य महाप्रभु गोवर्धन के ऊपर नहीं रखना चाहते थे, तो इन्हें भ्रांति पैदा कर दी कि लोग भी मुसलमान लोग आ रहे हैं मूर्तियों को प्रकट करने के लिए, तो काठोली ग्राम में आ गए। तो काठोली ग्राम में आए तो ये गोपाल जी वही हैं जो नाथ द्वारा के गोपाल जी हैं, वो श्रीनाथ जी हैं, तो वो गुफा से प्रकट हुए थे, तो वो जो है नाथ द्वारा में हो गए। तो कुछ इस तरह की जो है मतलब बातें हैं जिससे कि संकेत मिल रहा है माधवेंद्रपुरी के गोपाल जो है अभी भी उन्हीं ब्राह्मणों की परंपरा के द्वारा पूजित हैं जिन ब्राह्मणों को माधवेंद्रपुरी ने नियुक्त किया था। माधवेंद्रपुरी दो ब्राह्मणों को, जो बंगाली ब्राह्मण थे, उनको नियुक्त करके चंदन लेने गए और चंदन लेके तो वापस आए नहीं, माधवेंद्रपुरी तो वापस आए नहीं, वो तो फिर वहाँ रेमुणा में जो क्षीरचूड़ा गोपीनाथ थे उनको ही चंदन लगा लिया और फिर उसके बाद फिर जगन्नाथपुरी चले गए माधवेंद्रपुरी, और माधवेंद्रपुरी की समाधि रेमुणा में ही है, तो फिर वापस आए नहीं, माधवेंद्रपुरी तो वापस आए नहीं। तो वो जो है गोपाल जी, तो वो अभी भी उनकी सेवा हो रही है और गोविंदपुर में उनका मंदिर बना हुआ है, वो जो बंगाली ब्राह्मण होने की शिष्य परंपरा में उनकी सेवा हो रही है। लेकिन ये गोपाल जी और जो श्रीनाथ जी हैं उनमें एक समानता ये है कि जो श्रीनाथ जी हैं वो उनका भी बायां हाथ उठा हुआ है और बाएं हाथ की बाईं उंगली जो है सबसे छोटी उंगली है वो छोटी ऊपर की तरफ गोवर्धन धारण करने की। तो हम लोग इसी भ्रांति में हैं कि वो जो है मतलब वही है, लेकिन वो जो है प्रकट हुए थे तो वल्लभाचार्य को भी उन्होंने सपना दिया था कि मैं अब आ चुका हूँ, मैं प्रकट हो चुका हूँ। तो गोवर्धन की गुफा के अंदर जब वो प्रकट हुए थे तो उनकी उंगली जो है केवल जमीन से बाहर आई और एक जो ग्वाला था तो उसने जो है वो उंगली देखी कि भगवान की उंगली है, तो वो पूजा करते रहे। और एक गाय जो है वो आती थी अपना दूध बहा के जाती थी, तो वो सोच रहा था कि मेरी गाय जो है कुछ दुख लेता है, तो पता चला यहाँ पर तो फिर यहाँ वहाँ जो है जो गोवर्धनवासी लोग थे उसी उंगली की ही पूजा करने लगे। फिर वल्लभाचार्य ने जब सपना दिया तो वल्लभाचार्य आए और उन्होंने फिर खोद करके निकाला, तो वो श्रीनाथ जी का बिल्कुल अलग इतिहास जो नाथ द्वारा में। और गोपाल जी जो है ये स्वतः प्रकट नहीं है, वैद्यनाथ ने उनकी स्थापना की थी, तो वो स्वयं गोपाल जी मंदिर से कह रहे हैं कि मेरी स्थापना तो वैद्यनाथ ने की। तो इसलिए वो जो नाथ द्वारा के श्रीनाथ जी हैं तो वो भी गोवर्धन में प्रकट हुए थे कि वो श्रृंगार मंडल की एक गुफा में प्रकट हुए। और ये जो है माधवेंद्रपुरी गोपाल हैं तो ये गोविंदपुर के पास ही एक झाड़ी में जो है दबे पड़े थे और किसी पुजारी ने जो है उनको दबा दिया था झाड़ी में कि उस समय मुसलमानों का जो आक्रमण हो रहा था और सभी धर्मों को जो है वो खंडित करते थे। तो वो जो है अभी भी गोवर्धन नहीं है और वो कहते थे कि मैं यहीं कहीं स्वामी हूँ। तो वे गोपाल जी जो माधवेंद्रपुरी के हैं वो गोवर्धन नहीं है और उन्होंने कहा कि जो लोग नहीं मानते हैं तो उनको मैं भोजन देता हूँ। तो वो वहीं के जो है आप मेंटेन कर रहे हैं, उस स्थान के मेंटेनर हैं जो गोपाल जी। लेकिन उन्होंने अगर भ्रांति फैला दिया तो फिर हमारे आचार्य से उनके भी आचार्य हैं, अगर वो जो है भ्रांत हो जाए तो क्या आश्चर्य। तो गोपाल जी अभी भी आदमी को सिखाए गए, सब लोग सोच रहे हैं कि नाथ द्वारा में सीखना चाहिए। ये जो है बात है जो कि समझना है। वो जब गोविंदपुर में जब वो बैठे हुए थे, गोविंदपुर के किनारे बैठे हुए थे और सपना दिया था तो वहीं पास की कोई झाड़ी थी
वो डीडीज के दर्शन कर सकते हैं हम?
हाँ कर सकते हैं।
कहाँ पे वो जो गोविंद के बगल में जो मंदिर है? अच्छा।
लेकिन वो अपने को छिपा रहे हैं, वो छिपाए हुए अपने को तो सब लोग ध्यान देंगे वो ना अगर वो अपने को छिपा कौन जान सकता है ये बात है।